Hey, good morning, everyone. Maybe even good afternoon, maybe even good evening, depending on where you are. I hope everyone had a good night and is having your morning coffee, pastry, toast, whatever you do to get ready. We've got a good program this morning. We have Essentials of Securing Digital Transformation for Records Management with Carl Mazzanti and Greg Smith. Our sponsor is ONA. ONA's knowledge integration platform enables you to make your enterprise knowledge accessible, useful, and private. ONA connects you to all your favorite apps, unifying the information from each into a single platform. And through powerful indexing, classification, machine learning, and the like, these platforms help identify key information instantaneously for e-discovery, information governance, and so much more. On to our presenters. We have Carl Mazzanti. He is president and founder of E. Mazzanti Technologies, Microsoft's 2015, 2013, and 2012 Partner of the Year, and one of the premier IT consulting services for businesses throughout the New York metropolitan area, as well as internationally. His firm specializes in cloud solutions, multi-site implementations, outsourced network management, remote monitoring, and support based on Microsoft and related technologies for customers ranging from law firms to high-end retail and multinational corps. Greg Smith has been involved in information governance, data transformation, and discovery for a little over the past 15 years. He's been helping customers navigate various regulatory and legal obstacles such as GDPR, advising customers on best practices in retention and information management. As VP of Service Delivery at Messaging Architects, he is scoping, planning, and managing migrations, providing solutions and project management, as well as conducting training for companies of all sizes across North America. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Carl and Greg. I'll bring them up on the screen. I'll take myself off.
Good morning, and thank you,
Stephen.
everyone. Oh, yeah. So, Stephen, thank you so much for the quick introduction. And Greg, I think we can even pop past this. We've been in the industry for so long, and with all the local ARMA chapters, toast and thank you for joining us today. It's amazing how a year ago we were all standing together in New York City, and how much has life has changed. On the screens, we call it actually our sizzle slide. It's a quick overview of the organization, multi-site locations. Our office is almost like the United Nations, so we can handle discovery and the like in native languages. We list out some of our acquisitions, of which Messaging Architects was one of them. We shared so many customers together, and we're handling e-discovery requests that it made sense to have the professional practice inside of our organization. I hope everyone enjoys the time today and finds it informative. My primary desire here is to continue to expand inside of the ARMA inside of ARMA and helping so many of our customers out. See some familiar faces today, so it's so great to be here, and look forward to our time together. Thank you. And with that, Greg, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thanks, Carl. So welcome to the Essentials of Securing Digital Transformation for Records Management, which is quite a mouthful, but we are effectively going to take a little trip down and look at various options that we have and what we have to do in order to try and achieve some records management within some of the cloud solutions that we are all looking at in terms of moving forward. So just a little bit about myself, but I think that Stephen basically hit the nail on the head here. I've been in the business for about 15 plus years in e-discovery, information governance, and I am the delivery service manager for Messaging Architects. So with that, let's just sort of get into that. So I just want to kind of just go over the topics that we're going to address today. We're just going to briefly touch upon unified cloud solutions, Microsoft's information governance, how we handle the retention, labeling, and designation of items as records, and kind of look at that from a whole perspective as to how we can move forward and what has to be done in order to achieve the results that we're looking at in terms of records management. So, I mean, the future of cloud computing is not in dispute right now. We as an organization see that growth as being exponential. It's just, we're looking at that 94% of all workloads are going to be in the cloud, that more and more organizations are moving not only their applications over to the cloud, but they're also moving their entire infrastructures up into the cloud. So we're seeing growth year after year. The cloud companies are just loving this. We have hit the age now where cloud computing is the wave of the future. So many organizations, including many of your organizations, are looking to consolidate their costs and services with respect to integrated platforms. Now, there's many solutions out there. There's many cloud providers out there. There's many software, as a solution vendors out there, and there's separate cloud platforms just to host your systems. So, I mean, some of the top cloud delivery companies out there right now: AWS, Microsoft, obviously. Google has been in this space for a very long time, and all of these companies are really excelling in providing cloud services to their customers. So while AWS focuses a lot on PaaS, which is basically platform as a service. I mean, there's a little joke here that says, what are clouds made of? Well, primarily Linux servers. So AWS really does provide a lot of platforms for organizations to deploy their own services, and we do see a lot of vendors that are providing software as a solution as using AWS to provide those particular services. Office 365 and Microsoft really is addressing the SaaS, or software as a service marketplace, in that they do provide a fully functional platform as a service with their Azure space, but they also address the whole application suite. So they are providing full business solutions. So not only information governance and communications, but collaboration, enterprise resource compliance, security and compliance, ERP, CRMs, the whole gambit. Microsoft is basically providing a comprehensive set of applications and set of services to address the entire organization as a whole. So as you try to address the entire organization as a whole, you understand that there is a whole breadth of applications that make up what we all want to do or need to do as a business. And it's very difficult for a single company to exactly encompass everything. But Microsoft is doing a very good job. It always has, in terms of providing a service and then making that service better as it grows. So in terms of the integrated experience, Microsoft has basically provided a number of different services. Obviously, one of the key ones has been the email and calendaring through their Outlook application. Files and documents, which is very important to us from a records management perspective, make up the share, but these things can be stored in multiple locations as well. You have your SharePoint, which is almost your document libraries. You have your OneDrive, which is almost your personal home directory, if we want to relate that back to the old days of localized servers. And then we have this new emerging technology called Teams, which allows people to collaborate and not only do video conferencing, audio conferencing, instant messaging, but also to store documents and other information and share that amongst individuals. You have chat and instant messaging. So Teams is obviously a big part of that instant messaging. There's been a new acquisition called Kaizala, which basically is almost like a social media type of uh, tool for communication and collaboration. You've got your social media tool Yammer, which provides people the ability to communicate as well. And then you have your whole voice and video, which is handled through Teams and also handled through Stream, which allows the organization to, create video, share videos, share voice. There's a full integration of telephony services into Teams, so you can do away with a lot of your voice over IP and integrate them directly into Teams to have an integrated voice and data functionality within a single application. So all of these provide an integrated experience to the organization. And where this is coming from is that as organizations move out into the cloud, they are looking to basically have applications that all work together instead of having different applications that people have to select in order to go to a different service provider for one thing and then a different service provider for a different thing. So if they can create a unified experience across as many applications as they want, the organization is going to benefit from efficiency, and it's going to benefit from the ability to control all that data under one roof. So when you were getting, and we talk about managing information, there's a number of items and a number of areas where we have to pay attention to. So um, basically, obviously, the first one is security. We've seen a lot of that lately. The SolarWinds break and breach caused a lot of problems in the industry. So security is becoming more and more important to many organizations in terms of securing the data, not only from outside, but also from inside. We have the discovery, legal discovery, internal discovery. This has been important for many years now, and it's not going away either. The more information that we create, the more information that we keep in our systems, the more information that people have to go through in order to discover what they need. So, from a legal perspective, you keep information for a long period of time, you could be liable to have to search it and provide that information if you were requested to. Records management, why the reason why a lot of us are already here is that kind of ties into the whole discovery and security aspect in terms of how we manage records, how long we keep them, where we keep them, how we secure them. And finally, compliance. If you are regulated, if you are an industry that is regulated, then you do have to show compliance. And there's also compliance with your internal policies. Um, just for an example, one of the things that I've, you know, counseled people about for a long time with regards to e-discovery is that if you have a retention policy, it's up to you to show that you're in compliance with your own retention policy so that you're able to define whatever the parameters of that legal discovery request are. If you have a 5-year deletion policy and you can show that you're in compliance with your 5-year deletion policy, then there should be no reason why you should have to try and provide any information that's greater than that 5-year or greater than your retention policy. So all of these work together in order to help us manage information. So information governance with Microsoft basically is a very narrowly defined function. Information governance with regards to Microsoft really is keep what we need and get rid of what we don't need. And getting rid of what we don't need is really handled through the deployment and the implementation of their functions for workflows and labeling and record keeping. So this is the way that they're looking at getting rid of this information. Information governance to the rest of us means a little bit more. Obviously, security, where you're storing the information, access to that information is more comprehensive with regards to handling information governance. So we're just kind of going through what the definition from Microsoft is on that. So with regards to documents, files and documents, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, wherever you store those documents, I just wanted to state that right now there really is no control over where these documents are stored. Users, if they're given the rights, can store documents in any of these locations. So technically, you could have records in any of these locations. Um, there are cross-system management. So think about all of these individual components as being sort of separate components of a greater system. So you are forced to look at creating different types of retention, different types of policies for each area where this data is stored. So you have separate retention policies for documents that are stored in SharePoint, and separate retention policies for those in Outlook. And then you can also look at retention policies through labeling, which means that's applied to the actual document itself. And then there's also security policies that can be assigned through location as well as labels as well. So it kind of tend to meld together a little bit in terms of retention and security. So both these functions are kind of coming together under the same classification system within the environment. So in terms of retention, you can have a folder. That folder can have retention and security policies, just the same way as it does in your local file server. You can determine, who has access to it and who doesn't have access to it, and you can actually state, the documents that are all stored within this folder shall be constrained to a specific retention policy. You can also have user applied retention. So you can create labels, and you can have an individual that creates the document be responsible for labeling that document or assigning the security rights or the retention rights to that document based on a label. Now, of course, we all know that that's going to require individuals that create these documents to have a set of guidelines as to how those documents should be classified. And in many organizations, this is probably, especially large organizations, this should already be present within the organization. Whether everybody in that organization is capable of doing that or understands that is another question entirely. And then finally, there is the ability to administratively apply retention and security labels. So when I talk about that, you can run classification searches based on content or keywords within the document. So if you're creating documents and you have a subject line of confidential or top secret or something of that nature, you can have the system automatically scan for those types of documents and automatically apply security labels and retention labels to these particular documents. Uh, in terms of retention and security policies, each one of these particular um, services within the product has actually its own retention and security policies. So you can actually create different security policies. What I'm trying to show here is that it can start to get kind of complicated depending on where your information is stored within the organization. One of the things that you need to look at now as we move into this digital age and move into these integrated services is that it's no longer your word processing documents or your spreadsheets anymore. Now you're starting to look at not only my documents and my email, but what about these new Microsoft groups that can be set up? And a group now in Office 365 is not what we remember in the past, which was a distribution list or a security group. New groups now have their own email account and they can store documents in these groups. They're almost like a little mini team, but they're actually an Office 365 group, which is made for collaboration. Skype for Business, it's kind of being phased out by Microsoft, but it still may be available for a number of organizations providing instant messaging and conferencing services. You've got Exchange public folders. You've got Teams channel messages for chat. You've got Yammer community messages and private messages. So there's a breadth of information, and it's going to get quite confusing trying to determine. But one of the things that I think organizations need to take into consideration is what technologies are being used within their environment and what technologies can constitute a record within the environment. We know that from experience, a lot of these sources could be used for discovery, but do they constitute a record, or does the content in them constitute a record? That's another question. Regardless, retention does need to be a consideration for all of these sources, simply because it does spill back over into the discovery aspect that you might have to regulate or might have to control. So security policies, if you put in a security policy, the one thing that Microsoft does provide you is versioning control. So when you edit a document, it will edit the document, but it always does keep a copy of the previous document. So it's never just modifying the original document. It is always keeping a copy of the changed document. So depending on what system you're in, and each system, whether it be Outlook or Teams or SharePoint, actually all have a different area to store these changed documents. So I just wanted to kind of bring it forward and kind of illustrate the fact that, if you have a Word document and that Word document is edited or even deleted, that a copy of that document, that either the original or the deleted copy, will go into what's called a preservation hold library. And that preservation hold library will keep that document for however long the retention period is on that document. If we're talking about emails, when emails are deleted or edited, the change copy or the deleted copy works its way into what we call a recoverable items hold folder. And that recoverable items folder it's invisible to the user. So both the preservation hold library and the recoverable items folder are invisible to the end user, but they are accessible by an auditor so that they can look for that information. And again, that information is going to be kept as long as the retention policy on those systems or on that individual account specify. So what I'd like to do at this point is just kind of briefly pause for a couple of minutes just to see if anybody has any questions. That way we're not saving all our questions till the very end. I'm going to talk about, the whole records management and labeling in the next section here, but I just wanted to understand whether anybody had any questions or I could address anything with regards to the whole retention and preservation side of things. So we have a question, and the question is, with the labeling, who has the power to override labels? Do administratively applied labels override? We'll get into that in a minute, but effectively, just to answer your question, if you have a default label, that can be overridden. Once a label has been applied, you cannot override that label, and you can always upgrade, but you can never downgrade. So you can always increase your retention, but you cannot decrease your retention. And there are certain aspects when you basically classify something as a formal record where absolutely nothing can be done to it. Another question we have is retention still per document in the hold library folder? So again, it depends on how that information and that document was preserved. If that document was retained by a label, then effectively it's going to be that individual document retention. If it has been applied because of where that document was residing in a folder, then that folder level retention is going to be applied. Um, Another question we have, how much of a challenge is technical as opposed to process setup, maintenance, and administration? I would say that it's kind of like a tripod, okay? Maybe even four legs to the stool, because you have the setup, and then you have the training, and then you have the implementation, and then you have the management. So I would say that each of those is equally important. The setup of this, I think, depending on what you want to do. And that really comes down to the question of how do you integrate this in the organization. Obviously, I don't foresee anybody completely pre-planning this out and implementing everything at once with regards to records management, security, discovery, all of these components as an integrated function right off the bat. I see various components being integrated one at a time and then being joined together and integrated. So you have your compliance group, and you have your security group, and you have your records management group. And at one point, they're all going to have to kind of start to talk together about how do they, manage their particular uh, mandates within a single framework. So I hope that kind of it's a broader question that we need to kind of talk to, and a lot of that has to really do about what are the requirements of the organization, and that's the only thing we're going to find out by talking and sitting down around the table with all the groups and finding out what everybody needs to do. So I will move forward. I have another question session at the end of the next section, and we can address some more uh, questions at that point. So let's talk about labels. So basically, as I mentioned before, labels are used for retention. They basically can retain content for whatever time period you want. It can be actually the retention label can act from the creation date, or it can act from an actionable date. So you could put on a 5-year retention date from the time that that document was created, or you could put on a 5-year retention date from the date that that document was modified, so that if it was modified, the retention kind of falls back to its original state. Um, you can do it for information protection, so you can basically apply watermarks, headers, or footers to the document. You can encrypt or restrict internal and external access. So this is a label that basically allows you to automatically secure the document. So if you have a document that is, say, has top secret in it, and you apply the label, that can automatically restrict that document to a certain set of individuals. And it can also apply this top secret watermark, and it can also encrypt that document as well. So you do have the ability to apply a label which will force information protection. Um, the sensitivity level, so that there's 4 levels, 4 labels here. The only ones that we really have to pay attention to are retention and sensitivity. The sensitivity is a replacement to the information protection labels. And then the unified really is kind of an amalgamation. It's mainly for software development kits. But you have to understand that Office 365 has been a collection of various technologies that are starting to merge together. And some of them, such as information protection, were in a separate module called Information Rights Protection Module. And as these kind of get integrated into the overall system and into the overall licensing, then they get different designations, and they're handled in slightly a different way. So information protection and sensitivity modules, while they kind of do the same thing, they were handled in different ways from the client perspective. So an information protection module needed to put a plug-in into the application in order for you to see the features and functions that you could use in order to protect that document. Whereas with the sensitivity, they've built that in right now, so you see that through a different interface in Word. So as I said, those are the 2 that we really have to kind of pay attention to. Really, the other ones we are kind of legacy or development labels. So a retention label basically is for managing content for different retention periods. So if you've got a library and that library basically is a 7-year retention and you want certain documents to have a greater retention, then that's where you would put labels on a particular document. As I mentioned, it's going to define it based on creation date or modified date. You don't have a lot of selections there as you would in normal records management capabilities. So really, you're limited to kind of some physical attributes of that document. Now, end users can apply a label to a document. As I mentioned, it surfaces an interface within the application, within Word, within Excel, where you can apply a predefined label to that document. Unfortunately, only one label can be applied to each document. So this is where it comes into getting under coordination with your security and your retention and all those aspects to make sure that you're applying the right labels that are going to classify that document appropriately. Um, Labels cannot replace existing labels except for default. So if you apply a default label across the board, uh, then it can be replaced. But once a label has been applied to a document, it cannot be replaced, except it can be upgraded to extend the retention date, but it can't be withdrawn. So when we talk about how the hierarchy works with regards to records management, so obviously retention wins over deletion, meaning if you've got a retention policy on the directory or on the folder or on the library, that is going to uh, always come out ahead over any deletion policies. It will keep the document for however long that is. Now, when you have two policies that conflict, so you've got two policies now that conflict. One is a 5-year, one is a 7-year. It's always going to take the longest retention policy. So the way that I say that is that you could have on the entire library, you could have a 7-year retention policy, and then you create a subfolder within that library that has a 5-year retention policy. Well, because the library is a 7-year policy, the longest retention policy is always going to be observed. So that even those documents in that 5-year retention policy are going to be 7 years. And then finally, implicit before implicit, which means if you apply a specific label to that document, that retention label overrides whatever the other retention policies are that are inherited with the document. So we talked a little bit about automatic labeling. So you have the ability, if you're the records manager, to do automatic labeling, where you can go out and reach out across these systems, whether you basically do it on a locational basis or whether you do it based on content of those documents. But you can also do sensitivity content templates. So Microsoft does provide a number of sensitivity templates. So you've got templates like GDPR, or you've got templates that are looking for specific keywords. They may be looking for social security numbers, PCI, PHI, PII. So they could be looking for that. There's a number of predefined templates based on regulatory requirements and such that will go through and search for documents that meet those criteria. And then you can label those documents based on these sensitive content templates. I believe they even had one for vulgar language, which I think they've rescinded. I'm not sure. I think they got too many hits. You can also do it based on your own keywords and queries. So you can actually run your own queries and you're looking for your own keywords. And then finally, you've got these trainable classifiers. So a trainable classifier really is where you're going to feed the classifier a number of documents, and it's going to develop an understanding of what the content you're looking for within those documents is, and then it's going to go out and apply that to all documents that have kind of the same format. So you do have a number of very powerful tools at your disposal in order to go out and do automatic classification of records. So now, if you do label a record, you do have different ways of labeling these records. So you basically can label a record for retention. Now you can label this record or this document as a physical record. So putting on a retention policy doesn't necessarily label it as a record. However, you can say that this label does constitute a record, and you can create a label that basically either locks that record or unlocks that record, meaning that that record is locked and nobody can access it, or the record's unlocked. And then finally, your fourth option is that you can actually define that as a regulatory record. So each one of these has different capabilities once the record has been labeled. So just to give you a quite quick example here, if you just put in a retention label on a document, then that document's still editable. You can edit the properties. You can actually even delete that record, although it, obviously doesn't actually get deleted. It actually moves into that retention hold folder, but it gets deleted from wherever it is in the system. You can copy that document. You can move it around between different locations. So you have all that ability. Then if you basically classify that as a record and you lock it, now all of a sudden you cannot edit the contents. You cannot delete the document. You can still copy it and you can still move it around, but that document cannot be edited. And then finally, there's the record unlocked, which you still have all those abilities to edit it. The only thing you really don't have the ability to do is to move it or delete it. And then finally, if you basically put in that as a regulatory record, you're pretty well restricted on anything you can do outside of copy it or move it to a container. That document is effectively locked in the system, and there's no way that you can do any changes. So the only the caveat that I kind of mentioned before, you can't change a label. I kind of wanted to paraphrase that because there is the question of the overall manager or the overall records manager who does have particular rights to change individual records, but for the majority of people that are dealing with records, they cannot change those labels. So outside, if you classify it as a record or only put on a retention label, then you do have the ability to change those labels unless it's been classified as a regulatory record. Then it's locked kind of forever until that retention period is over. So again, just wanted to kind of emphasize that with regards to a regulatory record, that even the administrator can't change that label. Although retention periods cannot be adjusted downward, they can be adjusted upwards, but that's through adjusting the actual label parameters. So it could be adjusted upwards, but not downwards. The administrator cannot unapply the label. And basically, it must be set by the retention labeling process. So our policies. So just some restrictions. Normally, it's advised that you be very careful when applying a regulatory record against any record, because it is going to lock that record from being able to do a lot of adjustments to it after the fact. So just a kind of a word of caution. At that point, I only have probably we have a couple slides left after this, but I just wanted to break quickly. Because I see that we have about 5 minutes left. I just wanted to briefly break here, see if there were any questions with regards to the whole labeling. I know we addressed some of them previously, but maybe people have thought about some new things. And definitely you can email me with questions. Definitely, I know how hard it is sometimes when you look at something and then all of a sudden the presentation ends. You go, oh, geez, I should have thought about that. All right. So outside of the question with regards to emailing me any questions, not seeing any more questions pop up on the list. So hopefully I haven't put you to sleep. All right, so let's just take this one home and get you guys to ponder the contents and get you prepared for your next one. So just to let you know that there is the ability to import external records from different other areas. So I mean, what you're effectively doing is importing these as text records, which you are therefore able to search and do discovery on. It's going to be a little bit more difficult to classify them as records, but you still have the ability to do that since they are all being imported as kind of text records from all these different areas. So I just wanted to kind of throw up the splash screen to let you know that, if you go this route and you're looking at it and you're wondering, well, what about all my external, software as a solution vendors, that yes, there is the ability to kind of import some of that information. From a records management point of view, you have your own compliance screen and your compliance center, and you can manage and report on label activity. So you can basically generate reports on what labels are being applied to where, how many, what type of labels are being applied. So you do have that full capability, not only to set up and manage the system, but also to report on that and to set up these trainable classifiers to create custom labels. You can import retention plans that are created within spreadsheets to import into the system. And you can generate deletion and disposal record reports so that you can see what documents are being disposed of within your environment to show the compliance with respect to deletion. So pros and cons as we march into our summary here. The pros are is all this stuff is built into the Microsoft bundle, and it can define sensitive content retention applied manually or automatically, and it can trigger automated workflows. The cons are that this whole single label retention label is a bit of a pain for a lot of records managers that are used to being able to put multiple labels on a document, because that document may have content that spans different records, definitions. Um, if you apply a label to a document, it can take up to 7 days to apply that document. All right. So, sometimes you apply a label, it's not going to happen overnight. There's a higher level of licensing required for administration, so you really do have to, kind of spring out for the E5s and the G5 licenses in order to manage these applications. And as you can see, it can be quite complex to deploy and manage. One of the things that you may want to do is look at skilled assistance to help your organization. But comprehensive solutions will always have deficiencies. It's a matter of, is it best in breed? No. Does it have what I need to do for my immediate needs? That's the decision that has to be made. Solutions that you deploy can be simple or they can be complex, depending on what you want to put in it. But concise planning is required around your whole information governance and data creation, defining your necessary retention policies, interoperability with users. Are they defining the policies? Are you defining the labels? Are you going to have it manually? Are you going to implement it and integrate it with the data loss prevention capabilities? And then training and education are always required. So with that, again, definitely send me a question if you have it. I'd be glad to answer those questions, and we can definitely address that. I do have a question, examples of how this is being managed between technical. Again, it really depends on the organization. So every organization deploys this differently. We'd have to delve into that just a little bit deeper. But definitely hit me up on email and we can get into a discussion on that. So with that, it is coming up on 9:45 right now. And this is probably the first time I've ever finished on time. I want to thank everybody for attending and go out and have a great day.
Hey, thanks very much, Greg. Thank you, Carl. Thank you, everyone who was able to attend. Some great questions, and yeah, feel free to reach out to Greg and Carl through email with any further questions. I know we weren't able to get to all the questions, so feel free to reach out to them directly. And with that, this concludes this session, and we'll go into a break and start the next session at the top of the hour. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen.